I am pleased to be joined with my dear friend, former professor, and ongoing friend, Dr. David Nystrom, previously adjunct professor at Fuller Theological Seminary, um, provost at Biola, and now he is the professor in residence at Western Theological Seminary here in Sacramento. Uh, we have been discussing over the last several days the events surrounding the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And as I've shared often, I am an unapologetic follower of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And what voices, there are a lot of voices that are being spoken and heard to varying degrees. But what I don't hear articulated well, or at least well and often, is a voice that speaks to how did we arrive here and where do we go? Well, before we go, before we start heading off in a direction, it is, in my opinion, it's critical that we really understand how did we get here? And in the context of this, George Floyd isn't just one person that was murdered. There's a whole series of similar murders and crimes perpetrated on those outside of the realm of power. Dare I say, 400 years of continental history here in North America. But it goes back even further than that. So that's it on my introduction. David, you're a dear friend. I love you as the brother you are, cap and all. You're cap and all.
Getting my uncut hair.
That's okay. That's okay. Share with us, just share with us the history, the Middle Eastern history in the context of our Christian faith, and even how we ill navigated a path to where we are today. So, Dr. Nystrom.
Thank you, Mark. So, as we have been discussing, it's in some ways a mystery how we as a country have gotten to this place, and even how many of our fellow Christians seem to have reactions that are, to us, seem completely not just antithetical to how we are processing, but what the gospel pretty clearly would indicate is the path we are to follow. And I've noticed and watched on particularly white American bridle at discussions of or the use of phrases like systemic racism, and I've wondered about that, and I've thought also, how do we talk about the New Testament with clarity and force, even to fellow churchgoers? And so I think I'm starting to think it might be apt to use the language of atmosphere, because there's a certain atmosphere that is a part of American culture, a unique atmosphere. And just like we don't necessarily notice increased ozone levels or carbon dioxide levels when we're breathing it in, but just because we don't notice it doesn't mean we're not breathing in toxins. And so, and I think about Romans 12 too. Don't be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world. So the assumption, the presumption, is we're being pressed into a certain pattern by the forces of a culture, any culture, and I think ours is the most aggressive ultimately shaping culture that the human species has ever encountered. So what? So that it's shaping the American populace, and it's also hoping we don't know we don't notice it. So I've thought a good deal in the last couple of years, but particularly in the last 2 weeks about this question. And it seems to me maybe a place to start is Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. It's so young French sociologist who visited the United States, in the first half of the 1800s. So it's been a long time.
Mm.
And his book is often in 2 volumes has been called the best book about democracy ever written and the best book about America ever written. And his analysis was, America is so crazy interesting. I mean, there's such vitality. It's like everything from every kitchen in the neighborhood got thrown into the same mixing bowl and mixed together. And I thought, I taught in Sweden for a year 20 years ago, and my Swedish students, they would tell me, Sweden's boring. We're all, we all think the same. There's not much diversity here at all. And Tocqueville said, "Wow, I mean, that's what makes it so dynamic. This incredible variety of people and traditions, and that makes it such a vibrant mix." And he said, there's 2 dominant forces, like in the old Addams Family TV show, the 2 trains that Gomez Addams would put to crash into each other.
Yeah.
And one of them is, Tocqueville said, it's a whole set of ideas that come out of the Enlightenment that really glorify, the individual. People are good and getting better. There is no such thing as sin, really. We maybe make mistakes, but we're good and getting better. And the second idea was, the major idea is, the unending nature of economic growth. No limits. And so the economy can, if you run it right, the economy can always get better. And actually, the people that make that are entrepreneurs and that get uber wealthy, they're actually doing good for everybody, because they're raising the water level, and a rising tide floats all boats. And then the third basic idea, besides people are good and getting better, and the unending nature of economic growth, but the third basic idea is, the notion of self-restraint. We should throw that overboard, and so we ought to pursue this. You deserve whatever you want. I mean, that's the recent encapsulation of it. And Tocqueville put as a counterpoint, I mean, the Christian virtues, like the dignity of all human beings, and the importance of self-restraint. And he did say in this book that, what makes America so interesting and gives it such vibrancy is that these are fairly balanced, and they're counteracting one another. Now, fast forward to 1989, a guy named Francis Fukuyama wrote an essay called "The End of History," and it was published in not a horribly obscure academic journal, but in an academic journal, meaning less than 0.5% of the population would probably read it. But it became he became famous because of this, and the Pentagon. People were talking about it at the Pentagon, and he was on all kinds of news shows, because the idea of the end of history that comes from Hegel, that thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and that at some point there is going to be the last stage in human development. So that doesn't mean there won't be more stuff happening. It just means we'll reach a stage of human development where there is no like a system where there's no improvement. And so what Fukuyama said was, you know, in the 20th century, U.S. capitalism, United States capitalism, defeated communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, and there's no one left to beat up. Now what? Now he then, and you may remember in the first Gulf War, people were talking about, you know, oh, it'll be as soon as we knock over Saddam Hussein, it'll be awesome because people, you know, will just install democracy and capitalism, and people will get what they want, and it'll be fine. And they were misunderstanding Fukuyama's article, because then he wrote the book and he added the subtitle. So the title was The End of History, and the subtitle was And the Last Man. Well, that's what, you know, that's Nietzsche. You know, Nietzsche, who said, you know, I'm afraid that without Christian virtues, and he was no Christian himself,
Right.
he gave up. His father was a Christian pastor, but Nietzsche saw his father die of a horrible brain disease. But what he said was, you know, with Christianity fading from Europe, I'm concerned there's no moral, won't be any moral structure left. And without a moral structure, what he said was, people will happily, they'll happily accept a religion of comfortableness. And he called those people the last men. So Fukuyama called it subtitle The Last Men because he said in the 70, 80 years or whatever since World War II, American capitalism has turned into American consumer capitalism, where we're constantly told we deserve whatever we want the minute we want it. And that frankly is part of the environment, the atmosphere that people are breathing, that we Americans are breathing. And I think there's an awful lot within the American church, the American white church, that has linked certain features about American citizenship, you know, our independence and our rights, and that has, because we've been breathing that in, it's obscured. I think this is what's going on. It's obscured our ability to actually listen to Jesus and hear Jesus when he says things like, you know, he tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, you know, which is like the, you know, that's the, in many ways, that is the parable that it serves as the archetype for understanding his moral reasoning. You know, there was in the 60s and 70s, there were 4 brilliant Australians who immigrated to America, and one of them, I mean, they had a powerful force in the American cultural scene. One of them's a guy named Robert Hughes, and for probably 20 years, he was the foremost art critic in the United States. Wrote a famous book called That Fatal Shore about Australia. And he was I heard him interviewed 20 years ago, and the interviewer said, look, you know, you're this famous critic and you've been in America 20 years. What can you tell us about Americans? What have you noticed? And immediately he said, Americans have forgotten about their mutual responsibilities and are now interested only in their rights.
Wow.
So, the notion of the gospel somehow as enshrining the importance of me and what God wants for me. And the New Testament is very clear. Paul is very clear that we are saved from certain things. And one of those things is our addiction to culture, the atmosphere we're breathing. But you've got to be aware that there's something, you know, there are elements of the atmosphere you're breathing. But secondly, we are saved for certain things. And one of those things is, you know, is to turn away from your own addiction to yourself. That's what, you know, that's that which I don't want to do, I end up doing.
Correct.
but life in the spirit, and then this notion of being an ambassador. Our citizenship is somewhere else. But an ambassador represents the somewhere else where they're living, and they ought to, if they're any good, they ought to understand the culture in which they're living. And I think most of us Christians don't really understand it. We think it's just default, but it is an atmosphere, and and atmospheres can change, and they can have toxic elements added to them. So we are to be aware of this atmosphere. We're to resist it. We're to no longer be conformed to it, but to remember where our true citizenship lies. And then this other notion that the gospel carries within it, a contagion for good. Peace. This idea of peace in the New Testament, in Ephesians, it's not alone, but powerfully in Ephesians. The blood of Christ creates peace, and that peace is not simply the absence of apparent tension, that the papering over discord, but peace is an active force that goes forth. So that's shalom as opposed to pax or concordia, which is the absence of tension, even though underlying the absence of apparent tension, even though underlying fissures are there. But shalom is what it takes for good to grow, and that's what the gospel's about. It's about this contagion for good. And that's why Paul even says, this in Ephesians 2, the dividing wall of hostility. I mean, if we think about where there are walls, on our planet, Northern Ireland, Palestine, well, those
Southern
walls
border.
are there. Those southern border, building a border wall. Exactly. Those walls are there to preserve a situation where there is a lack of violent action. But that doesn't mean that those walls do anything to mollify the underlying tensions and anger that are there. So walls, and we think of, tolerance can be, when you hear like the wall of tolerance is, I tolerate the weeds in my backyard. I'm not trying to encourage them. I'm not trying to, so anyway, peace, the Greek and Roman word, the Greek and Latin words mean basically the absence of apparent tension, but the biblical notion of shalom means learning how to walk together and to know, and to know one another. It goes forth and makes good happen, and that kind of active agency to open your heart and life to one another, as opposed to I'm going to just continue to let you exist as long as I'm watching you from the other side of a window or something. And the gospel is about this powerful God-given force. And when you read a little further in Ephesians, it's really clear. He says this is God's secret plan. I want reconciliation is is my secret plan. My big plan. This is what I want to happen, and I want you to be my agents of reconciliation. That's 2 Corinthians 5, that we're ambassadors. And a gospel which fails to recognize that, that we are not just saved from our sin, and we're not just saved for heaven. We're saved from not just the penalty, but the power of the sinfulness within us. And we are called to, to be agents of this contagion for good, for reconciliation. Um, and God's big plan is is ultimately, as he says this in Ephesians 3. Um, you know, I'm counting on Christians to carry this message, and that will make clear to the principalities and powers that this is my desire, my agency. So, um, what does it mean to be a Christian living in a society? I mean, Augustine is the one who formulated most brilliantly this notion that, you know, um, in his city of God, which is not a city, but civitas, this, the human organization. Um, there are really three cities. Um, One is subtlety, or so citizenries. To what are we loyal? There are those who are loyal to this, to the city of Satan, and those who are loyal to the city of God. But we here on earth live in a third city, which he called Babylon, and that's Revelation. Revelation 18. It's Babylon, but it's the the seven hills. So that's really it's a cipher for saying this is the city of human desire, the empire of human desire. And Augustine said, so here, when we're on earth, we actually, the citizens, people who are called to be citizens, that are citizens of the city of God, and those who are citizens of the city of Satan, they live together in the same place, and they influence each other. They breathe the same air. They are each contributing something to the atmosphere they mutually breathe. And we, citizens of the city of God, who happen to live here in Babylon, we better realize that that Babylon is about empire history, and there are times the state is going to do what looks like the Christian thing, but we should never trust it because it has a different purpose.
Right.
And so it is about the contrast is the empire of human desire, individually and then corporately, as opposed to the kingdom of God, which has, well, you can spend a little time reading what Jesus says about about that. It's kindness, it's compassion, it's standing up for those who are in a system which has ground them down, and it's understanding the inherent dignity of everyone that's made in the kingdom, in the image of God, and frankly, that we need each other, that we don't just condescend to let the others exist, but we need each other.
I love how you put that. That is that's you painted an outstanding picture in terms of allowing you to exist. As we've shared before in other conversations, not having a knee placed on my neck is good. That's good. That's I love that idea. But is that the best we can do? I mean, is that really the best we can do? And I also love how you put it into word picture, the idea that we're breathing this this air that's been polluted, and we're taking that in.
We may not even know
we don't
it.
have masks. Yeah, and we don't have
Yeah,
masks. Yeah.
that's right.
What does this say? We don't have a whole lot of time. We will have to carry this conversation forward. What does this say about our faith lived out? Is it is it is and again I guess I'm going to answer my own question is if I really think about it, but I'll just say it. Is this a situation of there are those that profess Christ but aren't his, and there are those that profess Christ sincerely, are his, but are living in a uh, in a way that is not Christ honoring? Um, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, and there's certainly, there's certainly a spectrum there. I mean, even very devout, um, spiritually alive people come to a place as they grow older where they realize things they did or thought or said 10, 20 years before, or maybe 2 days before, turned out to be, all too human. And there is I think, I'll use the phrase, kind of an odd phrase, but godly agnosticism. um, we ought to, I think, for us as believers to say, to have this posture, here's what I think I should do, here's what I think the Christian thing is to do, but I'm aware that I am strangely addicted to myself. As Luther said, we're curved in upon ourselves, and we're not always able to see when that's really afflicting us. And that's part of the reason why Paul says we're a body. We actually need each other so we can help each other see with clarity, and to have that humility to yourself. I don't know. I don't trust myself always to be faithful, or fairly understanding what Christ, what God would really have me do. Um, and so, yes, I think you know in many situations, people who have diametrically opposed positions are equally certain.
Right.
And I mean, and so if we would be a little dispassionate, we'd say, well, they they both can't be right.
Correct.
And there's actually, degrees of wrongerness, all around. So a little more godly humility, and I so and as I think, yes, there are. So we're perhaps all of us are somewhat wrong on almost any on almost any um, issue, but certainly there are traditions within American Christianity which seem so um, today seems so captured by certain elements of American culture that 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 they've left out whole chunks of the gospel, whether it's, and this is not new, I mean, this goes back even 30, 40, 50, 60 years, the social gospel versus the um, I don't know what, the evangelical gospel, the thoroughly evangelical gospel. And it's, it's, and they, and there's something lost on either side. I mean, um, so recapturing the biblical model of Christ in you, and then opening your heart more and more, creating more space. Self-doubt about spiritual certitude is a good thing.
Mm.
And trusting, and then saying, Lord, this is what I think, but help me see with greater clarity. And um, I think, the other thing that's happening sociologically in this country that is really disturbing, and this was pointed out by a guy named Robert Putnam 20 years ago in a book with the odd title Bowling Alone. And that was the hook. He said, more Americans are bowling today than ever before, but membership in bowling leagues is plummeting. It's at the lowest state ever. But what he had done is he'd done exhaustive surveys of all kinds of organizations, voluntary organizations, and said, for whatever reasons, for a whole complex of reasons, Americans are what's going on in American society is we are seen consciously to be choosing to avoid connecting with people who are um, unlike ourselves.
Okay.
And that means we are, we no longer have, we don't really have a shared experience. And that allowing that to happen is, I mean, that how can you be an ambassador? If you never leave your comfort zone. So that also is, and Putnam isn't. He's not a Christian. He's not arguing for, I don't think he is, and he's certainly not a Christian book. But not being aware of the fact that that is happening in our culture, and that's something that as Christians we have a responsibility to, for ourselves, to work against. I mean, we can't just allow ourselves to be, to float along that where that tide is taking us.
Yeah.
But most of us do, because this is just the way things are. That's how, I mean, we don't even, it's presumptive. We don't even think about it.
Yeah. Dr. Nystrom, I want to say thank you. I was writing, as I was glancing to my right, probably your left on screen, is a whole bunch of notes, but one I put a little star by is you may not have said it specifically, but this is how I understood it. Right understanding brings about right acts. Right understanding brings about right acts. And what seems to what seems to be happening is that we're emphasizing right acts. Please don't put a knee on my neck. I appreciate that, but I would appreciate a right understanding, because that will bring forth, as you said, and I believe, consistent behavior, acts, and a better atmosphere for everybody to breathe, Christian and non. But again, this whole conversation is to the Christian. You have the last word, Doctor. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, we can learn. I mean, another change in the last 20 years that's very disturbing to me is the almost complete victory of functional, instrumental uses to education. So what can I do with this stuff, as opposed to what is this stuff doing to me? How is it shaping me? How is it changing me? And I think we can even see that. I think we can see it in certain forms of Christian teaching. It's about, what can I do with this stuff? How will this help me? But Jesus is about, he's about, this image of you're a thorn bush and you'd like figs, so you can either, grab figs and tape them to yourself, or you could be transformed. You have to be transformed. So knowledge itself, knowing the right thing, you can do the right thing and not actually be about becoming the right kind of person. I think that's kind of what you're talking about. But Jesus is about, I'm going to put it this way: it's discipleship is about learning from Jesus patterns of thought, patterns of heart, and those are going to result then in patterns of action. So it's not just knowing; it's also that experiential, that's having it shape your heart. So it's a way it's changing the atmospheric conditions that you choose to breathe in, and being aware of them.
Very, very well put, Doctor. Again, thank you so much. I appreciate you. This conversation will be carried forward. I will speak with you shortly in terms of where we go from here.
Well, Mark, I'm one of the best things in my life is our friendship. So
bless you. Bless you. You could have had the 5 magic beans. I keep telling you that. Really could. Thank you, though.
Thank you. See ya.